Cooperative Legacy Project interview number 37, reprised June 21, 2006. We're visiting with Orris Swayze, cooperative activist and alternative fuel supporter. Ori, where and when were you born?
2 November 43, Graceville Hospital.
Okay, and where's Graceville Hospital at?
Graceville, just across the line in Minnesota by Beardsley, somewhere in there.
Okay. And where was your family originally from before they ended up in this hilly ground in northeastern South Dakota?
Well, my dad's grandmother came over to Ellis Island as a young, probably 8, 9, 10-year-old. And so we're from Germany, basically. And the story the oldest sister of my grandma tells is about their mother tied them all together with a rope. And Gusty was her name, the oldest daughter, and she had a slab of bacon tied around her as they arrived at Ellis Island.
Ooh.
Off to the New World.
Okay. And you have brothers and sisters?
One brother killed in Vietnam, another brother we're farming together, and a sister in Minneapolis.
Okay. What were and are their names?
Gerald was my oldest brother, and Mick, my youngest brother, and my sister's Sherilyn.
Okay. And what was your father's name?
Clifford Swayze.
I'd like to talk a little bit about him.
Wonderful father. That's the main thing I can say. Wonderful father, just worked harder than any man I ever saw work, and always kind of have fun, and I just remember childhood as being great.
And your mother's name?
Rosella. Maiden name was Rosella Sikora.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they were just a small family growing up in a kind of a prairie, barely a step above a sod shanty. We grew up out in a house with a path and all that sort of thing, no running water, and which was fairly typical at that time.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, on cold days too. But she did a great job keeping 4 kids kind of corralled, and she worked some part-time at least, and just like my father, I couldn't have had a better childhood.
What are some of your early memories on the farm?
Milking cows every day, and swimming in swimming holes. We started up riding horses. My uncle used to say it used to be horses and horsemen around the house. He says now it's bicycles and baseballs. So we transitioned to baseball and just had, I don't know, it seemed like life was really, really good.
Was your family involved in Farmers Union at all?
Well, my dad, I don't think he was in any organization, as best I know.
Okay.
He was never in an organization. And the Wilmot Saddle Club.
The Wilmot Saddle Club, okay.
Yep.
So
they were part of that.
into horses.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, my dad rode in rodeos, and my mom was a good rider, horseback rider, and they rode horseback up until the last year my dad was alive. It wasn't uncommon for him to get on a horse and ride it all morning, moving bulls or whatever, and come home, get off the horse, and he wouldn't even wince. Like myself, I ride a horse for an hour, and it's like my bones are ready to quit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What sort of rodeo events was he involved in?
Well, he was, I think, saddle bronc and bareback and whatever. I can remember riding up the Whipple Rodeo, and he signed on to different events, and just like you would going to a track meet,
Mm-hmm.
So, and then he would ride, and my mom would get awful nervous. But it was kind of a rodeo. Was a Sunday afternoon event.
What's the idea? Make a little bit of money?
Yeah, because you paid entry fee, and and by golly, he did win the calf roping up there.
Okay.
Yeah. So
All right.
probably made some money.
What about the local cooperatives in Wilmot? Were your family involved in those at all?
Yes, my dad was always supporting local cooperative. I don't know if we looked at it as supporting the local cooperative. We were buying, we did our business there because it was a good, well-run business. It had its ups and downs, but it was a good, well-run business.
You ever attend annual meetings?
I don't. Yes, I did REA, and
As a kid?
as a kid, yeah, I can remember the good lunch, and from there, the memory gets kind of short.
Okay. And of course, one of the things we talked about is education. You attend a country school, or
Yes, that's when the countryside was still dotted with little country schools, which have almost all disappeared. A few of them are town halls yet. And we went to Spring Grove number 5, which was about a half mile away.
Okay.
Uphill both ways.
And walking all the way.
Yeah.
Horses, but they didn't use them for a half a mile trip, huh?
No, just in really bad weather. I've went to school in the bobsled, and then I've also ridden horses through the snow to get to school.
They have a barn there then too?
Yeah,
Some
well,
places did.
we just turned them loose though, and they'd come home, and the school mom, her husband had an airplane, and he'd bring her to school in the Piper Cub and land on skis out there. Drop her off and then come get her at night. We were always waiting and watching.
Well, I bet. That can't be very common.
No, I think that ended when he didn't quite get off. It was getting towards spring, and he tipped it up on its nose. And the teacher in the back, she said the first thing he said was, "There goes my prop." And by golly, it was right in the right sync, so it just stopped the engine. And he just tipped it up, and then he took off by himself, left his wife there. She stayed with us.
Yeah, not so anxious to ride with him anymore. Huh? What sort of an education did you get in those kind of schools?
Well, it was long and boring, but you just watch the clock. But for entertainment, you always had the classes up. You got the 8th grade arithmetic every day of your life.
So you knew it by the time you got there.
No, I knew what I knew what the questions were.
Oh.
I'm still trying to learn the answers.
Okay. And high school in Wilmot here?
Yes, Wilmot. Probably again just a lot of fun. High school was no responsibility, and just life was fun.
Were you kind of a wild kid?
No, I was really studious.
Okay. All right.
Quiet.
Okay. And you graduated when?
61.
61. Okay.
And I went right to Brookings and graduated from Brookings in 65. And by 67, I was through pilot training and at Da Nang.
Okay. And what were you flying over there?
F4C Phantom. My pilot training class, nearly everybody went to F4Cs Vietnam. And so it was something to get out of the way and then go on with the rest of life.
How did they use those in combat?
They were both air-to-air and fighter-bomber.
Mm-hmm.
And our missions were mainly North Vietnam.
Oh, okay. So you were over Hanoi and that sort of thing?
Yep, looked at Hanoi many sunny afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Do you know anybody who got shot down up there?
Oh, a lot of them got shot down.
Yeah.
And a lot of them ended up captured and came back.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that around the Hanoi area, there wasn't any pickups. You just, if you saw a shoot, then presumed captured.
Yeah. Yep. And your brother was a helicopter pilot?
Yeah, he went over about a year after I got back. He went over, and then he volunteered till he got in the middle of everything, and basically that was the last letter I got from him.
Mm-hmm.
And you know,
Yep. So you got back and you began farming then?
I taught school one
Taught
year,
school, okay.
and then we were always livestock oriented. I had a few cattle, and then pretty soon you got to buy a pasture for the cattle, and
Yeah.
so that's
What did you teach?
chemistry and biology and earth science, I believe.
Okay, okay. And we may be a little early here, but when did you meet your wife, Kathy?
I know I forgot the 20th anniversary, and the 21st anniversary is coming up at the 29th. I'm not going to forget that one. So it'd probably be 4, 5, 6 years before that.
Okay,
So whatever the math is, that's when I met
all
her.
right. Okay. And you got kids?
I got one son. Kathy and I have one son. Then I have 2 stepdaughters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And where are they all at now?
Brandy is in Georgia, and Christy's in Minneapolis, and both of them have 2 sons. So I have 4 grandsons.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pat is finish up welding training now, and so he should be back in the employable workforce in about 5 months or 3 months,
Okay.
something like that.
Does he have any interest in farming?
I think he does. I think he felt it was important, and I did too, that he go do something. And then if looks like farming will work, then come back.
Yep. When did you first become interested in ethanol? When you were talking about alternative fuels.
I got interested in ethanol right as I was leaving Brookings College. I had enough chemistry where I was trying to figure out, how many gallons you could get from corn. I was really pretty basic back in 1965 or 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And largely I saw that the agriculture thing was just all screwed up, and we needed to do something different. And I thought, well, why not make it into ethanol? And since then, when I was in Vietnam, you could just see how the whole world was run by oil, including the military, and that it was then a strategic something to fight over. So that I thought that would be the main reason to develop alternative energy, is to not use our kids as low-paid oil cops continually.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that kind of a nightmare back then I could see happening is in full bloom right now.
Yep. You were also involved in starting the South Dakota Corn Growers Association.
Yeah, as I remember it, and we had passed the producer, a group of missionaries, about 4 of us, and then the legislative missionaries were Herseth and Ferrix and Weber, all Farmers Union guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had passed the producer payment legislation, and we had decided, heck, they're going to kill us next year on it. So we had to find a way to keep that legislation. So we looked at forming an ethanol organization. We could see, you know, how it worked out in Pierre. You had organizations speaking for bills, and so it seemed to make more sense to say I'm Orris Swayze, South Dakota Corn Growers Market Development Director, rather than Orris Swayze, farmer.
Mm-hmm.
So we, rather than form an ethanol organization, because we knew that would not have legs, Roland Pester and myself and Jim Pufall, we kind of discussed, and basically I then called National Corn Growers and started the ball rolling, and served as the first vice president. I didn't want to serve as the first president because I knew I need to get other people involved. I couldn't carry the ball all the time.
Mm-hmm. Was it difficult to convince the legislature to enact a checkoff in those days?
Janklos is, yeah, I'll give you guys a checkoff. We'll just check you off at a penny, and then we'll send it right to Brookings. And then National Corn Growers says, yeah, we'll help you get a check off, and then we'll send it to National. And so we wrestled with that. I think we handled it pretty well. We kept most of the funds in-state directed at building an ethanol industry, and I think that was a big part of putting $1 billion industry in South Dakota, and South Dakota is out and out the leader.
Mm-hmm. Quite a different approach than most of the other checkoffs had taken, where most of the money had gone toward, as they would put it, promotion, which was on television advertising.
Well, it's promotion or really kind of do something with the money rather than do something constructive with the money. And promotion seems to be one of the things. Certainly it's not a crime to promote, but if you don't have a real plan to benefit from it, your members are those paying the check off. They are ridiculous.
Yeah. Why do you think other commodity groups have not kind of they've obviously had a chance to see the results that approach has had in South Dakota? Why do you think they've been so slow to change from their traditional approach?
Because the national groups control the locals, and no sooner had we a checkoff than we had a heck of a butt fight down at National Corn Growers, because they wanted to make it a national checkoff, and Illinois did not want it to be a national checkoff, which is a big, huge influence on what happened. So we teamed up with Illinois, and it worked well. South Dakota Corn Growers basically played a big role in defeating that, second to Illinois. Illinois carried the ball in that. So the corn checkoff has states still control their money, so that's where you can do things differently, although some states just forfeit the money onto national and do nothing.
Mm-hmm. Now, the corn checkoff is a voluntary checkoff, isn't it? And the producers
yes.
can get their money back. Have they had any producers that wanted their money back, considering?
I don't know where it is now, but we would always have a few, and part of when we formed the checkoff, we said, my golly, we were real honest, and I would hope it's the mission today that if you're not satisfied, call it back.
Mm-hmm.
And we aren't going to stand in your way. I think they have now said anybody calling money back cannot serve on the board, and I think that's wrong, because the original deal was, if you don't like what's going on, call your money back. Mm-hmm. And that keep the board accountable.
Yep. Would you like to comment a little bit on some of the early efforts to establish the ethanol plants, which of course came a little bit later than the checkoff?
Well, really, the
Brewing being the first one.
in what built the plants, and you can talk to Brian about it, but we had a producer payment similar to what Minnesota was. And that was passed before we got corn growers. But then the corn growers, rather than promoting and fighting over property taxes and different things, focused strictly on maintaining that because we thought that would be the advantage that would attract ethanol plants, and it ended up being a 1 cent checkoff, you might say, at the pipeline directed towards ethanol production, and just fabulously successful. It was the best deal taxpayers ever got. And really all they had to do was pay an extra penny for gasoline. And then they developed an alternative market that lowered the price of gasoline dimes.
Yep. And then, of course, the earlier promotional effort was an at-the-pump reduction in the state gas tax.
Yes, and so it kind of went together. They said, well, heck, we ain't going to give a refund to out-of-state produced ethanol, so then if we wanted to maintain it at the pump, we had to show that we could build an ethanol industry here, and I think the other states are looking at South Dakota, wondering how we did it, and they just don't get it. They can do the same thing and have big ethanol industries in every state.
How have relations with state government been? It seemed to me, having observed in Pierre, that there was some reluctance, mainly that they didn't like giving up any of the gas tax with the idea of the construction lobby.
Yep, the governor's always supported ethanol verbally. Then his spokesman, whenever we're talking about ethanol issue, would be his own highway department, whose general adversarial position was exactly the same as the petroleum industries. You guys are over-subsidized and whatever, and I honestly don't see how a governor can pretend to support ethanol and then have his highway department in there, his people, talking against it just like it's the devil from hell. And it goes on a lot yet today.
Has there ever been a tipping point where it was more difficult for those opponents of ethanol to make their case once ethanol had grown to a size in the state that...
Well, I think that the tipping point was when Wentworth was fabulously successful. From there on, greed took over. Everybody saw how much money was to be made, and then we got a lot of farmers invested, which is good. Now, North Dakota is ready to dump their ethanol efforts because they don't have any farmers invested, and that's strictly North Dakota farmers' fault. There's no finger to point but at themselves why they're not invested in it.
Was there a tipping point here in South Dakota where it became suddenly easier? Was it the Wentworth thing that convinced producers to invest, because now you open the door to a new plant and half an hour later it's completely invested, whereas you had the proposed plant over here at Rosholt that went through all kinds of trials and tribulations. I don't know, where are they at today?
Rosholt is successful as best I know. They still have, it was a bankruptcy thing and whatever. And see, before we always had the model of the ones that didn't work. And we were saying, but if you do it right, it will work. And with Dashel on the national level, like the bioenergy, where, it was good religion back then to do everything for exports. So if ADM exported 2 bushels of corn, the government gave them a bushel. And we says, well, hell, why not do that for our South Dakota ethanol plants? And Dashel got that done. And so, the tipping point, never was really an instant. It was just hard work and determination and people that says, we got to do something better. And I think it was mainly for ag resources. We've got to use our ag resources better back then. And national security side and, using our kids as low-paid cops, which still is poo-pooed today by certain groups. And I think that was always my goal, was that take oil off the table as something to fight over.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think the corn growers and the board have stayed on course that had been set?
Well, they're completely off from the original course.
Yeah.
The original course was to be an advocate for ethanol and industrial products for corn, South Dakota corn. And I think they're kidding themselves thinking the job is done, because we've built such a huge industry. We got to assure its success. And they have a resolution, same as the farmers' unions, but farmers' unions working hard on getting blender pumps out. Corn growers are doing nothing. And they have a couple $1 million in checkoff dollars, which I think they have missed the boat, and actually they've in many ways politicized the checkoff dollar by getting into tax issues and this livestock environmental issues and those sort of things. Now the checkoff dollar, because they have the same administrator, that the two boards are incestuous, and to say that and the office, and I don't mean it personally on anybody, but they've grown to think that's just the way to do business, and in fact they have politicized the checkoff dollar. We politicized it in the extent that we were hard after ethanol issues and tried to stay directed there. And I think people forgave us for politicizing their checkoff dollar, but towards ethanol, they kind of expected us to.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't expect them to take my checkoff dollars into all these other issues.
Yeah. Do you you feel like those organizations are doing enough or paying enough attention to the issue, perhaps, of keeping the ethanol industry in South Dakota at least largely in the hands of producers, as opposed to being taken over by outside investors? I think we see Dakota Sun now on the stock market, and those shares fluctuating, and people, perhaps producers, maybe getting dollar signs in their eyes and taking the early payoff to somebody else to sell their shares in a plant, and ultimately have that ownership passed to outside investors. And
well, what's happening? Yeah, we've got that temptation right here. As a matter of fact, in my local cooperative, with the Wilmot Co-op, we invested $100,000 into Northern Lights. That's grown to today's book value of $1 million, and it's returned well over $100,000. And now the board is discussing maybe it's time to sell the shares. And as an example, they closed down our gas station. And I was advocating they put a blender pump there and support our ethanol industry and our plant rather than divest from it. Why not invest in it yet? Mm-hmm. So I think if we get into that sort of attitude and that kind of leadership, it'll be detrimental. We will lose it, because it was farmers that built it in South Dakota, and it's important that farmers stay invested. In Glacial Lakes, it appears to me, doing a great job. Mm-hmm. They're making sure farmers are the ones that own their expansions, and like the brine companies, and like Fagan, they kind of gone to. Well, Brian wants to keep everything hooked into his world, and Fagan says, do whatever you want. he's not involved. So that's two different. And Glacial Lakes is saying, if we manage it, we're going to be part owners and we're going to be part of it. And so if farmers keep going that way, we will control the industry and grow it, and we've just got to be better marketers.
Mm-hmm. How much room for growth is there still in the state for new plants, do you think, right now, anyhow?
As long as we're exporting corn, we know there's a lot of room.
Mm-hmm.
And then why not import corn? If Minnesota is foolish enough to try to send it to the West Coast, let's intercept it and process it here. So it's as big as we want to make it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think state and federal governments, when we talked about the state government's attitude and the kind of two-faced attitude, I guess you might say, where supporting on the one hand and on the other hand, when it comes to particular issues, taking a different position. Do you think the state and federal governments have done enough to promote alternative fuels?
Well, they haven't. We wouldn't be in this mess if they'd have done it right in the first place. And part of it comes from, when the tax on ethanol is 20 cents and the tax on unleaded is 22 cents, they look at just the attitude perception. They look at it, well, the highway department's losing 2 cents on every gallon of ethanol sold. If they would look at it and say, we're actually gaining 2 cents on every gallon of unleaded that's sold. And really you begin to, so you're getting extra money. So just an attitude shift there. And if they need more money, raise it on unleaded. You don't have to raise it on the product that's produced here. And so we as farmers got to take them on that. Don't let governors and highway departments put out such a fraudulent argument.
How do you see the hand of the petroleum industry in all of this debate?
Well, you can see, they're trying to limit us to 10%, be an additive to their world, and then they can play us like a banjo string. And with blender pumps and E85, now they've lost control unless they come and buy the ethanol industry too. And pocket change for them would buy the ethanol industry.
What about making ethanol out of other items like switchgrass, which I think has been suggested? Those are possibilities?
Oh, they say, I think whoever's the World Bank guy, or who's the guy, economist, that was on the Federal Reserve Board, says...
Greenspan?
Yeah, South Dakota is full of grass, and they can really produce a lot of ethanol. Well, he hasn't been West River lately.
Yeah.
I think this whole switchgrass thing and whatever is... for me, it's kind of like a snipe hunt. It's a feel-good thing, and wherever cellulose is already being produced, like at wood chips and whatever, they need a satellite ethanol plant beside them to take care of their waste, quote unquote. But that's the place for cellulose right now.
Yeah. How do you view the current effort to reduce the tariffs on imported ethanol?
I think if it's done right, I think we should. And part of it is we need blender pumps throughout the nation, and then then that fuel then we've got a place for it. We go from an additive market to a 150 billion gallon market. So if we're just going to take them off, the tariffs off, and then push their gallons right away, it starts making the ethanol market unstable. And that would be a real loser. So just to take it off is not any good, but to get blender pumps throughout, and I believe Dashiell's fairly instrumental in that right now, and talking to Walmart, Obama, and those guys, and wouldn't that be something, the Walmart put in blender pumps throughout the nation and market our product, and Cenex is just watching. Cenex is us, I believe.
Yes. Yep. How do you see the role of EDM this. They initially were the largest marketer of ethanol at the earliest stages of this. Are they still a big marketer?
Well, they are a big marketer, and they've done a lot for the industry, but then the farmers, rather than speaking their own interests, started speaking ADM's interests, National Corn Growers and whatever. So there again, I don't know if ADM is the villain or the farmer that leaves his brains at home when he goes to a National Corn Growers meeting is the problem.
High gas prices have certainly been catching the attention of politicians. Have you seen in the last year, has that been an asset for ethanol development?
Oh, sure. If gasoline were 50 cents a gallon, why produce ethanol? Mm-hmm. And, well, there still would be good reason, because they can do this to you anytime. If it gets cheap again, they can do this again.
Yeah. Just recently, there's been some folks claiming that ethanol is the reason why gas prices are high. I saw that on CNN just this week. Their so-called business analysts.
And there's a certain amount of truth in that.
But it's money that stays at home here in the United States.
Well, it's the way ethanol's marketed, where we've decided now that I think the oil companies, they wanted to play this game. They can play any game and make money, but when MTBE went out, then they brought in ethanol to replace it all, and there could be a shortage in that effort right now, so that could drive gasoline prices up. Mm-hmm. But overall, alternative energy at least somewhat controls the king effect of oil.
Yeah. A lot of the initial farmer-owned plants were started out as cooperatives, and they're LLCs now. Do you see any problem with that, or is that? Oh, I think they generally operated pretty much like cooperatives.
I think it depends on the managers. A well-run LLC with farmers' interests in mind, it can be a hell of a lot better organization than a co-op. But likewise, the co-op can be run right, like Glacial Lakes. I use them. I think that is just a heck of an example. I congratulate those guys.
You've had a chance over the years to work with a lot of individuals. You mentioned Senator Daschle. Do you want to talk about some of those folks and the contributions they've made?
Well, the guy that made probably the single most contribution to South Dakota was Dave Hallberg, who was president of the RFA when I first met him. He was traveling with Daschle. But he came to South Dakota and went to the legislature and planted the seed that says if you do your incentives right, you can build a South Dakota industry. And you've got to restrict your incentive to benefit your in-state production. And he was basically taking on ADM right then when he said that, which, he and RFA eventually became more controlled by ADM, and Dave decided it wasn't worth fighting that war and moved on. But we're very fortunate to have him come and talk to the legislature, talk to many congressional hearings and that sort of thing, and the ethanol industry has his fingerprints all over it. As Senator Daschle will readily say, he was the key advisor to him and basically help be the architects that build the ethanol industry nationally and in South Dakota. So there's the pair that did it, and the rest of us all don't even know it. Well, I think that Senator Daschle certainly gets a lot of credit for it, but it seems like they all forgot that a couple of years ago.
We honored the senator at the National Farmers Union Convention a couple of years ago, and I remember sending him some photos, and one of them was a photo of a very young-looking Tom Daschle filling up with gasol.
Yep, and I can remember one event in we had our first E85 car out to D.C. We got it right up on the Capitol Yard there. so Bob Dole, different people could walk out and sit on it, and it was like a marvel. Here's a car running on ethanol. As it turns out, the car didn't need any modifications. We could have went down the street and bought any car and put it up there and run it on E85. Not any car, but most cars. And we were having the fight with National and whatever over getting an oxygen requirement. And National Corn Growers says 3.6 or nothing. And so they tried the 3.6 and didn't get it. So then I can remember talking to the RFA and different national corn growers, well, we'll try again next year, this sort of thing. And then being down in the office of one of the national corn growers lobbyists there, and he's on the phone passing the word, we better get on this 2.7 oxygen requirement or Daschle and Dole are going to pass it without us. So then they signed on, but that just shows the enormous impact Tom Daschle had on the ethanol industry. That 2.7 was very, very crucial. And then now the renewable fuel standard. And Dave Hallberg and Tom were teams working on that. So I still converse with Dave almost daily. Mm-hmm. So it's been a wonderful experience working with those guys.
Why do you feel like here in South Dakota there's been so much reluctance on the part of the state government, not only not to mandate the use of ethanol, but to not even require their own state-owned vehicles to use it?
Oh, I think it comes back to the tax thing. You guys are stealing money from the road department, and that's the highway department's position. And they never look at it as, by golly, maybe we're getting more money because we have a surtax on gasoline. They've always looked at it, we're getting less money because we have a subsidy on ethanol. Mm-hmm. And that perverts all thinking.
Yeah. How much property taxes are being paid now by ethanol plants?
Oh, gee whiz, I would have no idea.
That's money that wouldn't be existing if there was no
But
ethanol.
you can buy E85 for $1 a gallon less than gas up the road here. Mm-hmm. You can down in most places it's 50 cents a gallon less. Mm-hmm. So the enormous amount of money the ethanol industry has put into South Dakota pockets, that this would be an entirely different state to live in had we not had this amazing explosion. And really it was hard work that did it, but it paid off.
What about some of the other organizations, the American Coalition for Ethanol, for example?
Well, I have greatest admiration for Merle Anderson. I've traveled with him, speak to him quite daily, but he was the inspiration behind ACE. And when we first started, we were shoot from the hip, and I enjoyed that. And now, as it's a more in place, respectable organization, more conservative, and a lot less action.
Okay. What would you list as the most significant achievement so far in this whole thing? Just getting these plants going?
No, it's linking agriculture to energy, because our best value for ag products is through energy, but that's kind of a mercenary view of it. I think the best thing is to wake the country up that oil isn't cheap and we're killing kids to get it.
What do you see as the most significant challenges out there yet?
Marketing, so that you said, keep farmers invested, keep in keeping regional markets, so we don't have to regional markets as an alternative to national markets, so we don't have to sell every gallon on the train or through BP Amical, because that's the Achilles heel. That's where we lose it. But if like Glacial Lakes and Verison set the example, their own brand, and they're marketing their own ethanol.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else is turning marketing over to somebody else. And I think that's a bad business.
Mm-hmm.
And not developing an alternative market, such as E85 through blender pumps, is really grossly incompetent, because the best value for ethanol is more at the E40 range for environment and for the consumer. So we're giving away 40 cents a gallon in basis because we don't offer it in its best used blend.
Mm-hmm. One of the areas that Farmers Union has worked in almost since the beginning of the organization was in cooperative education. You think that cooperative education actually probably ought to extend over to LLCs too, and that they ought to maybe pay attention to the same sort of issues that maybe cooperatives have paid attention to, and making sure that people out in the countryside who want to be invested in it understand the whole issue?
That's right. That's right. Education is the best tool for us out here in the country, and I think to like a farmers union to be married strictly to co-ops, I don't think they are, but I think to point out the advantages and disadvantages of going other ways. You can. Mm-hmm. And really, you look at the models that are out there. There's the Glacial Lakes deal, Cooperative yet,
mm-hmm.
and then there's these LLCs like ours over here.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can show, there's different ways to do it, and
sure.
Look at the advantages of both.
Yeah. Bottom line is maintaining producer ownership of them.
Oh, you bet. That's right. Using the tool, and if cooperatives, maybe we've got to figure out a better way to design the cooperative or whatever. Hell, a mind that wants to figure something out usually
mm-hmm.
can.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's attitude. Do we worship co-ops? Hell no.
Mm-hmm.
But do we say they are a valuable tool and recognize they are? You damn right.
Mm-hmm.
And a great history.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in South Dakota, it was the cooperative and the farmers that laid the groundwork to build this ethanol industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it can always be that tool, and we don't want to forget that.
And probably today's younger co-op members maybe aren't as familiar as they should be with the history of their own organizations, but at the same time, not knowing that history, it could be dangerous for them if it leads to them losing a hold on the ethanol industry, for example, by not understanding how important it is to be owners and more than just selling commodities, which get us back to where we were.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think maybe it's we don't have good enough advocates for the young guys. I see that in the VFW, and we're talking about veterans' rights and veterans' benefits. Hell, there's a good share of older veterans that think, they're all a bunch of crybabies and really they don't need any benefits. Well, you take that over to the cooperative. The guys that benefited most from cooperatives don't speak highly of cooperatives.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't recognize the potential of cooperatives. So it's probably, yes, we got to educate the younger kids, but if they go home and the older guys are saying, shit, those co-ops are obsolete. So it's a two-way street. We need advocates.
Education all across the board.
Yep, I think so.
Yep. Probably see the same thing with regard to land prices. Maybe people always being interested in taking the top dollar as opposed to perhaps helping a younger guy get started.
Oh, I'm sure. The whole money thing is getting big enough now where, estate planning, and pretty soon nobody controls anything. It's a trust or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so That's the bad side of high land prices.
Yep. What kind of advice would you give someone today that wanted to, that maybe was thinking about maybe getting involved in the ethanol industry or farming, either one or maybe both, which would be the best thing maybe?
Well, farming, I think you got to find an in of some way, and whether it's working with a relative, renting the ground, or starting a small cattle herd. I think probably the best advice is have another way to make a living in case it don't work.
Would you advise them to be involved, as opposed to? I think there's an awful lot of guys out there today who are probably just taking care of their business and that's it, and they're leaving the politics, not necessarily in a partisan manner, but politics and leadership to somebody else.
And that'll never work. And I think in my case, there's one thing being involved, and there's another thing being addicted, and somewhere there's a balance, and certainly everybody's got to be involved and do what they can, and just to ignore it and say it's all politics, a bad deal, is irresponsible.
Mm-hmm. Would you describe yourself as an optimist or a pessimist? I think I know how you're going to describe yourself.
I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist.
Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
No, I just want to thank you guys for coming around and doing this, and hopefully it's what I've said is of some value.
We've been visiting with Orris Swayze. Thank you for participating in the Cooperative Legacy Project.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.